especially towards the end. What did you guys talk about this morning?
Risk assessment, ma'am.
And what did you guys learn from that?
Just how critical it is to think in depth about all the variables that go into missions and planning, and how to prepare to execute in a safe manner.
That's excellent. So you started thinking about those mission variables. You started talking about how to mitigate that risk, and you talked about kind of the Army way of doing it. So I just want to highlight the fact that that skill set you're going to use throughout this course. So not only we're going to go over training management this afternoon, and this block of instruction is going to be evaluated by a practical exercise. You will use that risk assessment, those skill sets during this practical exercise. On top of that, you're going to use it again when you conduct Plan-X. You're going to have to use that same lesson that you just learned, and then again when you go to the field. And then honestly, again, as a platoon leader. So you're going to continue to use that skill set that we talked about today, that lesson that you learned today throughout your time here at BOLC on multiple different exercises. So the exercise for training management, the practical exercise, we're going to evaluate that skill, as well as when we're doing Plan-X, which is kind of like a culminating, it really ties in a lot of different skill sets that you'll learn here while you're at BOLC. And then again, when we're in the field, especially if we execute, if you guys have the opportunity to serve as the range OIC, and we use that training event. So just be prepared. I know you guys are getting a lot of information, but be prepared to utilize that skill set again. It will definitely come into play again. So let's first talk about what we're going to talk about today. So training management. What's going to happen for your training management block of instruction is we are going to, and one other thing I should probably set kind of just the expectation management. When we're in BOLC, you will absolutely have homework while in BOLC. So during some of the times, you will kind of do the Monday to Friday where you'll start out with a block of instruction and then you'll test on Friday, but be prepared that a lot of the weekends you're going to have homework during BOLC, which will include like memorandums for a record. It's going to include a letter to your battalion commander. We're going to have lots of different homework assignments. You might work on an information brief, a lot of different homework assignments throughout the course. So just be prepared once we go through actually the written comms block. And just the comms skills in general are going to be taught again by Mr. Lee and Mr. Wilcox. They kind of team teach. So either Mr. Lee or Mr. Wilcox, they will teach that block of instruction in person, and that's the one that Mr. Wilcox was referring to. And then there will be a lot of assignments associated with the ability to communicate. Communication is incredibly important as an officer. So on top of that, this weekend, your big assignment is going to be this training management project. You're going to work as a group, as groups. We're going to give you groups tomorrow, so don't get too worried about it today. But this training management block, I'm going to go over some basics today. I'm going to introduce you to training management. I'm going to go through just this. I'm going to go through these slides. We're going to start talking about different concepts. Then tomorrow morning, Captain Lasky is going to dive into depth about training management in general. He's going to provide some more insight on it. Then in the afternoon, he's going to go over those systems, and he's going to assign that practical exercise. You guys will be briefing us on Monday your plans. So it's going to definitely take work and coordination for you guys to get something that's to, a level that's required for this course. So I'm just trying to prepare you on what we're going to expect after this block. Yes, I'm thinking this is Lieutenant Rodriguez. I see Rod, but.
Yes, ma'am, Lieutenant Rodriguez.
Yes.
Just a quick question. Will we be utilizing DTMS for this block of instruction or for the assignment?
So no, we won't use DTMS. And the reason why we don't use DTMS for this block of instruction is because there are a lot of people without CAT cards right now. And in addition, are you like National Guard Reserve?
Yes, ma'am. National Guard.
So you have the opportunity to be attached to your UIC, I'm guessing already. Is that right? Are you already in your position? And you already
I'm still working that out. I'm still currently attached on the UMR for my AGR unit. I haven't been formally released yet, so I still have access to that. But I'm assuming I'll have access to my new unit as well once that transition is done as well.
Yes. So really, one of the reasons why we don't, I think, utilize DTMS is a lot of people won't have access to. One of the things about DTMS is like what you can see really varies on what unit you're attached to. So like right now, I'm attached to Logistics Leader College, so that's what I can see when I pull DTMS, which makes it a little more difficult to use some of the systems in place in DTMS. But we are going to use a lot of we're going to introduce you to some great resources. We're going to talk about our mission essential task list. We're going to go through, actually it was really about, okay, so the last time I taught training management, probably about a month before that. So probably about it was like last summer. So probably like the June, I think, timeframe is when I really noticed that a lot of the training resources for platoon leaders specifically. So really, I think targeting those kind of lower levels when I saw a lot of them updated. So we're probably talking about like June, July 2020. There were some major updates and major changes to a lot of the systems that we had in place. So we're going to focus on learning the fundamentals, using those systems. And then once you get to your units, you guys can learn how to kind of plug in that planning into what is the Army system of record. We will definitely talk about DTMS. We're going to talk about it today. And without a doubt, you are right. DTMS is the Army system of record. And so that's a great point. It's where you're going to track your training. You're going to have visibility over training that's been complete for soldiers that come in, what they're lacking, what they're current on, all the above. But no, for this practical exercise, we won't actually work in DTMS. Awesome. I see another question, but I can't tell who it is. I see a hand raised. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know who's speaking.
It's
but
okay. LT Fredericks.
Yeah.
So just a quick question. So the training management block that we start today, that is being assessed by the practical exercise as in our briefing on Monday. And then do we have another test on it in the future, which is question 1. And then 2, the lessons that we just received the past, I don't even know, maybe 1 or 2 days, I forgot. Are those being tested in any aspect, in like a quiz or anything like that?
No. So Mr. Wilcox, I think, said that at the beginning of his block. So though you're not going to find that material on any of the like written assessments that you're going to take. Yes, this practical exercise is the only way that will be assessed, with the exception of what I would tell you is the blocks that Mr. Wilcox went over, that risk assessment block, that will be evaluated. Like I said, you're going to use that skill once we get to the training management PE, you're going to see that skill utilized in the training management PE. Then you're going to see that skill utilized again in PlanX, and you're going to see again that skill used again in the FTX. So that class that Mr. Wilcox taught on risk management, that will be evaluated essentially in those 3. These are the only 3. Those 3 areas. But other than that, you're not going to see that material. It won't be on your TAC log exam or anything like that. And no, there's no other quiz for this training management. It will be evaluated exclusively by the practical exercise.
Thank you, ma'am.
Awesome. Anyone else? Any other questions? Perfect. I don't see any other hands raised. So perfect. Let's talk about, and can you guys see the slides right now? I'm using Google Slides. I heard that people like Google Slides from my last class. That was that's some of the feedback that I got. So I am trying Google Slides this time, but it is my first time using Google Slides. So how's it looking for y'all? Is it good? Do you guys have a good?
Sorry, ma'am. We can see it. It's not in presentation mode, but we can see the slides.
Okay. Let me see if I can. Let's see if this works. What about now? Can you see it now well?
Yes, ma'am. It looks good.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. So the first thing I want to talk about, so we're going to talk about training management. We're specifically going to talk about training management at the platoon level. And so today, that's a really great topic because one of the great things that you guys are going to do, and I think one of the most fun things you're going to do as the platoon leader is training. I love being in the field. I love how people come together. I love the experience. So first, I want to start with who can tell me about a really negative training experience that they had. Tell me about a really negative training experience.
Ma'am, you're muted.
Thanks. I was going to say, please work with me while I'm doing names right now. If I mispronounce your name, just give me the quick, Lieutenant, I'm going to try it, Gayatas. But work with me because I'm still learning names, okay? So if I really mispronounce your name, help me out. Or if you know you have a really difficult name, where's my
Ma'am, it's no hard feelings.
Okay, I was gonna say I am very willing. I really like learning names, so help me in the beginning to just learn names. Okay, if I'm butchering your name, please come up on the net and just let me know. So go ahead and tell us about I want to hear about your negative training experience.
Yes, ma'am. So basically, I was an MS4. And we were orchestrating land nav over in San Francisco, and we were doing it at this big old park in the middle of San Francisco. And we were not aware until the exercise was 10 minutes from starting that the maps we had physical maps we issued to everybody. They were not on the same scale as normal Army maps. So like protractors. Everyone's normal map reading skills just went out the window. We think that the S4 may have gotten the maps from like a park ranger that they just didn't check them. And so the maps that this park uses are not what we use. They're not on the scale we use for training. So it was pretty negative because us as the MS4 class, it kind of made us look like doofuses, because all these underclassmen are ready to go. And they're looking at us and we're just staring at our cadre like, oh shit, what do we do? And we ended up having to basically plot the entire point. We had to go over the entire point strip over at the table and give everyone new coordinates based on this new scale that was used by the park. So it took a lot of time away from training. And it made us look kind of silly as, the senior class and whatnot. But, we were able to just push through that, I guess.
I was going to say that is a great example of a negative training experience because, like you're saying, everyone wants to be efficient. That's 100%. And when things go wrong and it doesn't work out the way you have planned, it's always a challenge. I see someone else who has the initials NW, but I can't tell who it is. So go ahead. Do you have another negative experience for us?
Yes, ma'am. This is Lieutenant Wiggins.
Awesome. Tell us about it, Lieutenant Wiggins.
Sure, ma'am. So this was actually back in October with my unit. We were doing nighttime drivers training, a giant ordnance base, Letterkenny Depot in Pennsylvania. And there's like the actual ammunition storages within the base is gated itself. So and then it's guarded by not MPs, but I guess they're hired contractors for the base too. So the guard there let us in normally, and I was back at our reserve center, kind of keeping in communication with the drivers. And so they were doing their nighttime drivers training. Then I guess there was a guard switch, but the guard who was there, he just left to go to his security hut or whatever, way back, I don't know, wherever their HQ is, and no one ever came to let my guys out. So we had to stay an extra 3 hours and up until like 2 a.m. until another guard came, and we had to go to the security guard shack or whatever and see what was up. But it turned into a complete mess after that.
Awesome. So we're hearing a lot of trends in when there's a lot of confusion that and kind of chaos that really kind of gives some difficult training experiences, which is great to highlight. And I see another hand, Lieutenant Hernandez. Tell me about your negative training experience.
Hello, ma'am. So as an MS4, I was in charge of coordinating with the university as far as training events. So whenever we need to rent out or utilize a field, I'd be the point of contact between the program and the university. So I was tasked with scheduling the OPAT exam for the MS1s, 2s, and 3s. And I coordinated with the university to have it done in the gymnasium. And this was done a month out. And every Friday, I would visit the gymnasium and verify with the students who worked there that the gym would be open at this time and this equipment would be there. So fast forward a couple weeks, my last check, which was on a Tuesday for the Wednesday OPAT, I go in and I talk, and instead of the students working the desk, it was this higher level manager, and he says, whoever told you that was wrong, and that's against university policy. You can't rent it out, or you need an X number of people for the event. And I was showing him the documentation saying, I've been visiting over the course of a month. How did this fall through your fingers? And ultimately, I was showing my distaste for the situation. So around 7 p.m. that night, I had to call our master sergeant and say, the location is no longer suitable and we have to find a new one. And the only problem with it was the next day it was scheduled to rain. So we had to go to the basketball courts on the other side of the university, and it was locked up the next morning. So we pretty much had to drive around the university to find an open spot and hurry up and conduct the OPAT before university officials saw us.
Man, I was just saying some very interesting challenges already. So you guys are going to easily be able to relate to these experiences that we're going to talk about. And you're also, I think one of the great things about having experiences like that is that you can relate to what your soldiers are feeling. So you're going to, throughout your time, you're going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes in training, and it is absolutely, and while I wish I could say it didn't impact my soldiers, it absolutely impacted my soldiers. Now, who in the class can tell us about a positive training experience? Tell me about someone who's had a really positive training experience, and tell me what it is that made that experience so positive for you. Okay, great example of a name who's gonna have to help me. Oduro, Lieutenant Oduro something. Help me with your name.
Yes, ma'am. It's Lieutenant Oduro.
Okay, I'm getting a little feedback. Do you just go by Lieutenant Oduro? Is that it? That's all I have to.
Yes, ma'am. That's
okay. Awesome. I can do Oduro. I can do Oduro. I can do that. Awesome. So
I don't want to make it hard, man.
Oh, no. I was going to say, I like names. I think it's important to identify people, but sometimes names are a little bit of a struggle for me. So help me. So tell me about your positive training experience. Tell me about what made it positive.
Oh, it's a brief one. So I show up at my unit, and the XO says we're going to conduct an SI. And he said, today's my last day at drill. I'm moving to Hawaii, and you're going to be in charge of this. So I was like, interesting. Then she takes me into where we have all our sensitive items, and then literally walks me through step by step who to see to go for, where to actually print out the checklist, who to see to verify things, who to communicate with to get the arms room unlocked and all that to conduct those sensitive, the SI check. So I thought it was pretty good. She didn't just say, hey, you're doing SI and just leave and then have to figure it out, but actually did one with me, which I thought was very thorough. And so the next month I was able to do everything by myself because of the training that I received from her.
That's awesome. So we love hearing about one, a good handover. That's awesome. And two, that you were able to, as a result of that training, do it again. So that's, I mean, whether it's you or it's your platoon, that's ultimately at the end of the day, we want them to be well versed in the whatever skill set it is that we're training on. So that's fantastic. I see one more hand. So let's take one more positive story, but I cannot tell who it is. Can you, if you have your hand raised, go ahead. I don't even have initials for you this time.
Hi, ma'am. It's Lieutenant Colorado.
Awesome. Tell us about it, Lieutenant Colorado.
So when I was at OCS at Fort Benning, I had a really great company commander there that like really emphasized training, doing a lot of reps. And in the very beginning, he said like no one ever got recycled from his company or failed land nav, which is like one of the highest things that people fail at OCS. So we went out to Red Diamond out at Fort Benning, and we went out there in buddy battle teams, and then we went out there with an instructor, and anyone who was struggling got a second rep every day, each afternoon, because we were out there for 5 days to do land nav. And on the first day, every single person passed on the first test day. And that was the pretest, and we all passed, so we didn't have to do the actual test. And so we got to go home early. So that was one of the best experiences I had there.
That's awesome. So another thing that you highlighted right there is the fact that you guys were training, and that something that was really, I think, motivating to you is training to a certain standard and training to a certain level of proficiency. And we're going to talk about how to assess proficiency, not only on the individual skills that you were talking about, but also as a unit. And so I think, but you're highlighting a really great thing, which is about when you train to a standard and you're looking for proficiency and you guys met that standard, then the training was complete, and how motivating that can be. And how I think for me personally, when people in the unit know and understand what it is, they have a goal in mind, I think you're going to see whether that's land nav or whether it's whatever task that you guys are assigned to do, if it's, refuel operations, if it's supply support activity operation, whatever it is that your unit is responsible for. If that standard is clear, if it's defined, if it's measurable, then and everyone in the unit knows and understands what standard is that you're trying to obtain, then the people are very motivated to meet that. So that's fantastic, and we're going to talk about the things that go into that today, which is awesome. So that's a great segue into, we'll go ahead and get started and start talking a little bit about these slides. So the training management at the platoon level. So just to talk about training management a little bit, I want to talk about how important it is at the platoon leader level, training management, how important it is to focus on training. So we're going to talk about how we assess training. A lot of that assessment is going to be at the company level. It does not take away from the fact that ultimately, at the end of the day, you're responsible for your platoon's training plan. So how well your platoon does when they're required to fulfill a mission is going to be a direct reflection on the training that's conducted. Now, what do I see in real life? It's incredibly difficult to, especially I would tell you in support, any kind of support organization, it's incredibly difficult to find time for training. That is one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have. So between the training rotations that are going to be conducted by your unit specifically, let's say you're in a BSB or an FSC, your maneuver battalion or your maneuver brigade they're going to have a very set training schedule most of the time, especially if you're in like a field artillery unit or a unit that these units are going to have what goes into planning that, the ammunition, everything, the training area, everything that goes into that is very set. And so when you're a support organization, that ultimately drives support that you are absolutely going to be required to do. And as a result of that, your calendar gets full pretty quickly. And so on top of that, you're going to have a lot of taskings. And I promise you the number of times that I had, especially, so I was the distro platoon leader, TMRs, transportation movement requests. If you happen to be in the Alpha company, you're going to have the 10K forklifts for the BCT. While they are not a pacing item, they are a very hot commodity. The number of TMRs that would come in and then conflict with training that we already had on the calendar, super difficult. So making sure and understanding, having that troop to task, knowing what goes into training management is critical as a platoon leader, because it lets you speak and communicate to your commander in his or her language, because they're talking metrics, they're talking big picture organization, and they're talking about how they're assessing the organization on a higher level. So make sure that you know and understand how important it is and what a critical role you, even as the platoon leader, are going to play in training management. Now, when I say that, I tell you, not just you, but you in conjunction with your platoon sergeant. So ultimately, at the end of the day, NCOs are trainers. The execution of that training should be NCO led. So you want to see your executors on the ground conducting that training, but they need someone advocating and planning and fighting for them to have that opportunity. They need time, they need resources, they need the opportunity to do it. So make sure that you know and understand, and also, of course, leader presence. I mean, all of those things are critical. But this training piece, I will tell you as a platoon leader, when you leave with this practical exercise, it might be one of the best products that you leave from BOLC with, because it's something that you can literally take to your unit and start looking at. So is it going to be exactly like your units? No, your unit's it's going to be, every unit you go to is going to be special and unique. They're going to have different taskings. They might do it differently. They might have different cycles. They might do it different ways, but at least you have an idea of what to look at. And especially you're going to be exposed to the systems that you can look at to know about your specific unit. So this just highlights a quote from Caesar, but really it highlights how critical it is for how training ensures that victory. That is what it's highlighting. So when you train hard and well and efficiently, a lot of your stories that you talked about today, when you highlighted a negative training experience, it was actually the lack of efficiency. That's the common theme that I saw. So that shows you exactly what's going to drive your soldiers crazy. I think one of the most common and unfortunately most detrimental to the morale of the unit is wasting people's time. And that doesn't matter if it's a private, and it doesn't matter if it's a lieutenant. It doesn't matter who you are. When you waste people's time and you don't have efficient, effective training planned, then I think the morale of the unit goes down significantly. When you have efficient, high quality, high speed training planned, that builds your unit's confidence, it builds morale, and it also, then the idea is that it ensures victory. So really looking at how this holistically goes into success of an organization, and just going into the fact that really training at the platoon level can focus on these 3 training proficiencies. I want to highlight these 3: battle tasks, weapons qualification, and collective live fire tasks. So those 3 training proficiencies, that's what your training at the platoon level will focus on. Those 3: battle task, weapons qualification, collective live fire tasks. With that training, the idea is that they're going to build the knowledge, then they're going to build confidence, and then you will ultimately have a victorious platoon. So how do you do this as a platoon leader? What do you do? You need one of the most critical roles that you have in this training, and how you kind of build this victorious platoon that we're talking about in this quote, is that you have to develop your training plan. So training plans are absolutely critical and essential, and you have to understand your higher level mission in order to conduct that training plan. So we just talked about taskings, we talked about additional requirements put on you, transportation movement requests, where we talked about how there's going to be training for your maneuver battalions, maneuver brigades, and how you're absolutely going to have to support that training at certain times. All of those things go into making it difficult to ensure that effective, efficient training of your platoon. And that's why it's so important that you make that training plan. So in order to do that, platoons, you can master those individual tasks, which, like Lieutenant Colorado, you talked about. You said, hey, we did land navigation. So you master those individual tasks, and then they build that foundation in order to go into that company echelon training. So when we're talking about training proficiency and we talk about our mission essential task list, some people call it the metal tasks, we're going to talk about how all of these things build upon one another and how you're really like one piece of that pie. But that does not take away from how critical it is that platoon level training and what a difference you can make as a platoon leader, and highlighting the 3 proficiencies: battle task, weapons qualification, collective live fire. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to talk about conducting a platoon training mission analysis. We're going to talk about making a training plan. We're going to talk about training events, and then we're going to talk about measuring it, which I think is a really fun, very misunderstood topic a lot in the Army, and then about recording those platoon training results. So, platoon leaders, what do we want to highlight? We want to highlight that as a platoon leader, you have to support the commander's training mission. So ultimately, at the end of the day, when we're talking about a mission essential task list, that resides with the commander and the commander alone. The commander is going to assess that proficiency. When you talk, we're going to start talking about a T, a P, and a U, about how to assess that training. That rests with the commander alone. So note that. But as a platoon leader, you are that commander's, for that platoon, you are the commander's eyes and ears, and you're also responsible for preparing that piece of the pie. So when you're talking about an alpha company, and we're going to go into, when we talk about tactical logistics, we're going to talk about what an alpha company does. In one of the platoons, you're going to be doing fuel and water operations. In another platoon, you're going to be doing distribution operations. Ultimately, the commander is responsible for that entire mission essential task list. But those are very different tasks. So your platoon, very well, you might end up in a sustainment brigade where you have an entire company of the same thing that's just alike. That might happen, but you might not. You might end up with platoons that really look and train completely differently in order to fulfill that piece of their mission essential task list. But you as a platoon leader need to support the company commander. You have to, in the development for training for your platoon and the company. And then also you need to develop your own plan to train your platoon. So we support the company commander in this development of a training plan. We want to make sure that we keep the platoon's proficiencies current and to standard. So we want to make sure that our platoon is well trained. It looks easy on paper, but when you think about everything that goes into it. So when you're managing people, let's say you're managing gun crews or something like that. When we conduct this training, and you establish a certain standard, when one person leaves, then that crew is no longer certified. So when do people leave? NCOs leave for periods of time to go to NCOES. People get pregnant. People PCS. Life happens. And so recognizing, it looks kind of simple on paper, like, oh, I'll just take when we're looking at MTO, you're going to think, oh, I have all these people. But really, when you get to managing it and you start looking at how difficult it is to actually maintain proficiency. That second bullet that they're talking about, that platoon training proficiency, keeping that current, I promise you is more challenging than it looks. And we're going to do it in a bubble for this exercise. But when it's real humans, real lives, there's always way more complications than I can ever even describe to you. So, you know, we're going to essentially assume that we're at 100% for the MTO. I've never been in a single organization, never been in an organization where I've had every single person. And on my MTO, yet alone has every single person been like deployable and like a 1-1-1. No, that is not real life. So we're going to learn the basics, but I just want to highlight the fact that when you're talking about these collective, specifically these collective tasks, how difficult it is to maintain that proficiency. So after that, we're going to talk about the fact that as a platoon leader, one of the big things that you do is you ensure that your platoon has the resources they need to train. So who is going to be the main execution? Those NCOs. They're going to be your main trainers. That's one of their main jobs. So what are something that absolutely we need to do? We need to ensure that they have what they need, the time and the resources that they need to train. So they need land, and not just land, but land that works for the training that they're doing. So making sure that that land's available. Different places, I've had some people have had difficult experiences with range control. I've had great experiences with range control, both at Drum and at Campbell. Actually, I found that if you're proactive with range control, they are not. Some people seem to like have a adversarial relationship with range control, but going there, working through, they tend to be the experts. So it's not going to say that in here, but every time that I've needed a piece of land, going to range control, especially for some specific training, I have just gone to range control and talked to people. Said, hey, because that training area, you can't see everything on that training area on a map. It just isn't the same. Just like Lieutenant who talked about the maps at the park in San Francisco. Sorry.
Me, ma'am.
Okay,
Lieutenant
Galatis. You talked about the maps in the park. Maps only paint one tiny picture of it, but what I found is that a lot of people at range control, they know that training area in and out. Really, because all the range controls I've been to has actually been civilians, so they're there for years. And so identifying and requesting those resources, then I know what training area I'm going for. And then when you talk to your, most of the time, it's the XO of the company that's responsible for going. But I know, I don't think that it's unreasonable to ask if you can do it as a platoon leader, that I'm going to S3, the land and ammo NCO, and I'm going to ask to make sure that I can get that, whatever land it is that I want, and what dates, because I know my training calendar, and I know that if I need land or I need ammunition, that doesn't happen overnight. You can't get land and you can't get ammunition overnight. It's just not the way it works. Resourcing in the Army, not easy. You have to plan that in advance, and that's when it comes into planning that training is so critical. So after we do that, we've gotten these resources, we've done this awesome training, then we have to record it. So we need to make sure that it's identified in what it is that they've just accomplished and that proficiency that we've just accomplished. So note that, record it, make sure that it's done. And then just the last thing highlights how important it is to create innovative and challenging training. So people love to be engaged. I honestly believe that people enjoy, everyone, but especially soldiers, they enjoy being challenged. They want things that are realistic. They want things that are measurable. They want stuff that's achievable, but they want to be challenged. So make sure that the training that you're planning, it should be fun. It should be engaging. So I think that that's just a great point to make. So one reference that we're going to talk about is FM70, Train to Win in a Complex World. So really this talks about FM70, highlights the fact that it expands on ADP 7.0, but it's the foundation for how leaders should conduct unit training. And it really highlights the role that commanders play. But as your representative for that commander, you absolutely have a critical role. And I think most of the concepts that it says that it applies to commander, you can really extend to platoon leader as well. Well, ultimately, the commander is responsible. It's no reason that they don't apply most of the lessons that, while the commander is responsible for overseeing it, it's good for you too. So don't look at FM 7.0 and then think, oh, it says commander. You honestly need to assist that commander in these things in this training process. So we can go through and look at these resources. I use primarily when I'm looking for this, I'm looking at APD. So I use APD. I know APD is difficult. I highly recommend while you're here to dig into APD and get more familiar with it. I struggled with APD as a platoon leader. It's not something that came easily for me. I don't like the fact that it's quite difficult to kind of search and use things on APD. And sometimes now it makes more sense to me because I understand how the Army goes through and kind of writes regulations. But it took me a long time to get used to finding things in APD, a long time. So we want to go through and look at this proficiency, look at these resources so we can plan training and we can plan effective, efficient training. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 3 components of training proficiency at the platoon level. And I know I already talked about these for a second, but just highlighting them again. So battle tasks, weapons qualification, and collective live fire requirements. Those are the 3 main components of training at the platoon level. So it's good for you guys to know and understand that, because that understands what you're going to highlight as a platoon leader in your training plans. So with that, we also want to talk about the fact that as platoon leaders, I want you to know your platoon's weapon proficiencies. So if you are managing people, you need to know not only your individual weapons qualifications, but you also need to know your crew serve and platform qualifications. So we want to know and understand, especially like, let's say you're running gun trucks or something like that. You need to know what proficiencies each one of those have. So you should be able to know that at the drop of a hat. So that's something as a platoon leader that I actually carry around and that I know because I want to be effective, I want to be current, and it helps me understand what is my priority for training, because I know if I don't have, like, it just depends on how many crews, but if they're not qualified, if they're not proficient, then I know that absolutely needs to be a priority. And then I'm communicating that is speaking my commander's language. So I'm going to talk about that a lot when we talk about mission essential task lists and when I talk about how important it is. But if you don't have crews that are qualified, then you need to be fighting for your training when really this comes up when you have competing requirements. So when you talk about qualification, when you talk about proficiency, when you speak in that language to your commander, that's speaking your commander's language. So if you have a training event planned and it's been on the calendar, you have the ammo, you have the land, you're ready to rock and roll, and you're taking your platoon of 30 people out for this training exercise because, really you have 40 people, but you have 2 that are at NCOES and 2 that are doing something else, 2 that are on a long-term tasking, and then you have 2 that are leaving, so you're not taking them because they're, within 10 days of PCSing. Okay, so you're taking 30 people out. You know that if you have 30 people, you're going to meet this level of proficiency. And then, like 3 days before the training, what pops up? A tasking. And the tasking's for 10 people from your platoon. And you know that if you fulfill this tasking, which this absolutely will happen, anyone who's been in any logistics organization will tell you, this is going to happen. You're 10 people for this tasking. What do you need to communicate to your commander? Not that not sir or ma'am, I need 10 people. No, that's not what you as a platoon leader should be communicating. You need to communicate to your platoon, to your company commander, sir or ma'am, if the 10 people for this tasking come from my platoon, I will not be able to meet this proficiency. I will only have X number of crews qualified. This is what this training is going to provide you. You need to talk in metrics, not in, well, if I have 10 people, if you take 10 people for the tasking, then I'll only have 20 people to do my training. That's not your commander's language. Your commander doesn't communicate the metrics. If you are doing that and you can communicate to your commander what it is and how that training can be a piece into their mission essential task list, then that is going to make your training, that makes your training more valuable. And it's a great reason for you to actually keep that training on the calendar. And a lot of times they'll choose to keep it because you can communicate those metrics appropriately. If you can't communicate what you're going to give them as a result of this training, and all you can say is, well, then I'll only have 20 people to do my training instead of 30, they are less likely to protect that training on the calendar. And that's what I really seen in a lot of support MOSs, is that it's very, very difficult to get that training protected. We have I think even more than in maneuver units, because we have so many taskings and so much responsibility to enable other organizations to do their own training. Can anyone expand on that? Has anyone seen that? I know we have some prior service. We have a couple different logistics. Does anyone have any experience with that? Can you talk about what you've seen for training in your units?
Yes, ma'am. This is Lieutenant Wright here.
Yeah, go ahead, Lieutenant Wright. Tell us.
I was a cadet in an Alpha Company BSB Fort Infantry battalion, and that happened literally every time we went to the range to get weapons qualification. There would be some tasking, 5-10 soldiers would come from our platoon, and our platoon sergeant would always say, well, there goes those. We would pick soldiers that at least had weapons qualification from 2 years ago, but we wanted to get as many people that hadn't had it since like basic or AIT to get on those range qualifications. But it happened every single time we went to the range.
I wish I could say that your story was unique, but I really have seen this as a systemic issue, especially in support organizations. So you talked about an Alpha BSB. That is, I was gonna say that's my bread and butter. And that's exactly what I consistently saw. So it's easy for us to talk about, sure, we're gonna meet this standard on paper, but exactly what you described, when I would tell you my biggest challenge with training is exactly what you just said. 5 or 10 people for a tasking, spot on. Lieutenant CK, I can't see your name, but go ahead, tell us about yours.
Ma'am, it's Lieutenant Kendall. So I am already in a platoon leader position at my National Guard unit, and whenever I first got there, and then it continuously happened, I actually had to go to my company commander about it and my platoon sergeant, but my platoon, there's like 4 platoons in our company, and I was 4th platoon. We're also the smallest, and we're in a support maintenance company, and it seemed like my platoon was just always being tasked out with so many things. And so then I wouldn't have much of a platoon left that, like, during training, that was really necessary. So what we actually had to do was, and a lot of it wasn't really that we were being tasked directly. It was just that my platoon sergeant, like when the commander and the first sergeant say, like, we need this, this, and this is how many people we need from platoons, he would voluntarily every time be like, oh, 4th platoon will do it, like 4th platoon will do it. So I had to have a conversation with him and my commander, first sergeant, about just spreading the workload between the platoons in the company. And because our soldiers weren't getting like cross-trained or any of the other really important training that they needed that was mission essential for the company as a whole. So I had to really just make sure he understood that, yes, that's okay. Like, our people from our platoon, there can be people from our platoon that are sent to do, you know, the stuff that was tasked out to do, because it also needed to be done. But we had to be careful with like overdoing it, because then you're taking training time away from our soldiers that are like very important tasks. So we actually ran into that issue too, where it was like, literally our platoon was getting tasked out for everything, so we didn't have a platoon to actually put into mission essential training. So that was something I dealt with when I first got there, and it has improved greatly now that we have like a better understanding. And I started developing kind of more of a training plan and who is proficient in what and who isn't, and just kind of, you know, when we do have to task out, being able to task out people who already have the experience so they can do that while the other people can get the experience that they need. But yeah, that was a huge issue when I first got to my unit. So I would say that was my experience.
And I have seen exactly what you described. It's sometimes even harder when you're talking to a maneuver commander who doesn't always understand how important it is for especially low density MOSs to get that training, because when you have good training, which is exactly what you're describing, then the soldiers do better at their job. They can actually support you in a more effective manner. And sometimes that's not necessarily highlighted. And you'll see, a lot of maneuver organizations just want stuff done and they don't highlight that. So protecting training, like you're talking about, I say is very difficult. Experiencing that balance, figuring out what it's like, very, very difficult to navigate. And especially when you have a battle buddy that, you know, is trying to do the right thing at probably, like, that's, you know, they're volunteering